Three. My guest today is Carl Sealing. And Carl, tell me, how did you become interested in Bigfoot?
Well, started out kind of weird. Back when I was a kid, about 14, 15, I think it was like 1976. Um, I happened to be walking to my friend's house up the railroad tracks, and it was a cut through. There was no houses between like my house and his house. I could take the railroad tracks instead of walking up the road, which took a lot longer. So I just decided, one afternoon, well, let's see what they're doing. Jumped on the tracks and started walking up the tracks. Oh, I got probably five, about 5 minutes from the house, and I'm walking in between the rails, and I'm just looking down. It's had to be around July, August at the time. It was warm out. Beautiful day. I remember that, and just walking down the railroad tracks, looking down at the railroad ties, so I don't twist my ankle or fall in between one or trip or anything. And I'm just, just doing that. I don't even know what I was thinking. Just don't fall, don't fall. And I ended up tripping, and I ended up like falling fast. Like when you trip and you try to, gain your balance again. I did that like three, 4 or 5 times, stopped, and then I looked up, and about 100 feet, 7,500 feet in front of me, there was this tall, really dark brown black, like almost looked like a statue. Probably says, oh, I'm saying, I mean, I was almost 6 feet tall, so it had to be 8 plus, maybe 8, 9 feet tall. And it just stood there in between the railroad tracks. I'm like, what's this? It actually looked like I'm looking at a shadow, but it was tall. Um, Looked like a really beefed up basketball player. Tall like that, built like that, um, bigger shoulders, longer arms, long legs, and like I said, it was dark brown, almost black. And then looked at it for probably, I don't know, 5 seconds or so. It looked at me. I didn't know what to even think. I mean, I really even don't know how I was feeling at that time, emotionally. Was I surprised? Was I shocked? Was I scared? I don't even remember any of that. This thing like looked at me like I looked at it. Um, I'm assuming it was looking at me. I couldn't see the face. Because I had like the sun coming from behind, behind it towards me. It was pretty bright out, so I really couldn't see anything. It just turned and took a couple steps off really quick off the side of railroad tracks and up into the woods. And I sat there, I'm like, yeah, there's no way that's a bear. And I was like, I couldn't see any, the face was flat, but the head was really small. And I was like, kind of looks really weird, big body like that, a small head, but I couldn't see any shoulder or any neck either. So I'm assuming that it was, kind of like a football helmet put on somebody's shoulders. But I mean, the shoulders were really wide; it had to be at least 3 feet wide, And this thing was just tall and built like that. Um, like I said, it walked off, into the woods, and the only thing I could think of after that was, what I saw probably was like the year before. I mean, the only thing I saw that was close to what was in front of me was the thing that was on the $6 million man, because it was like maybe a year or two before that is when that came out. But I was never really into Bigfoot or Loch Ness monster or anything like that. I was more towards like the horror stories and um, dark shadows, that kind of stuff when we were kids. Creature features, that kind of stuff. Not Bigfoot, Loch Ness monster stuff. And this thing just walked off into the woods, didn't say anything. I didn't hear really anything besides it walking away. It was fast. It wasn't really as fast as a deer, but I mean, it moved pretty good. It was faster faster than a person. And that was the last I saw of it. And all I remember is walking to my buddy's house and not saying anything about it. And I was like, okay, didn't think about it for years. Years after that, I was like, didn't phase me. Um, but then I started, and I really don't remember why. I, I was retired. I was going through YouTube channels and bored sitting home, and I'm going through, and I saw one of the movies. I think it was Bigfoot. It had what's his name in it? Greg Brady. I think he was one of the stars in it. And I'm sitting there, and I remember I says, "Ah," so I got interested looking at that, and then I was looking at more and more into different big, podcasts and different, movie makers and documentary people and stuff like that. And the more I watch those kind of things, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, it's like I was watching one. It was somebody was reporting large footprints in the snow, and I was like it just like a light just clicked on. I was like, I could remember when I was a kid that we used to play in this field up by the power lines, and we used to ride our sleds down this like power line road, like a dirt fire road that went up there, because the older kids had the snowmobiles. They would pack it down for us, and then we had our runner sleds. We get really good sled ride out of it. And I remember walking into the field, a couple of my friends, and we saw these footprints, and they were really big. We were like probably 10 years old at the time, pretty close to that. And there was like one footprint, and then there was another one, quite quite a couple feet, in front of that. And we're like joking. I can remember joking about the giant. Oh, a giant must have made these. Look, he walked all the way across the field into the woods. We're not going to go there. But then I remember, trying to jump from one foot to another footprint, and we couldn't do it. It was just way too far of a gape in the foot, in the stride. And I was like, okay. And I remembered that. I watched another couple of them, and I think I was watching one with Olympic Project on finding the Bigfoot nests, and just like the same one, it was like click. In the summertime, probably right around the same age as I was in the winter, probably in those seasons. We go into the field, and the grass would be like 3.5 feet tall, and we play like army in it because we could literally get down underneath your sight from somebody else in the grass. And one day we were up there playing, and I remember these giant um, impressions in the brass, and it was all packed down, and they were big. You can put like 5, 6 kids in them. And we're like, nah, there's no way a deer made these. I mean, these are huge. We've seen little, pat downs of where the, deer would sit here and there, and they were only like maybe like 3 feet, big or something like that. But then the other ones we were in, they were like figure 6, 8 feet round. We put five of us in one of the impressions. There was a few of them, a couple, like maybe 3 or 4, and I didn't think anything about that until I saw it on the video of them showing what the possible Sasquatch nestings were there up there. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And now I'm thinking about it. I'm like, okay, I remember I remember my sighting, and I'm like, it's not too far from where we played as kids because it was all in the same area. Um, I didn't realize until I started watching the different YouTube channels of the different names that Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Hairy Man, things were called. And I saw one day where they started calling it the hairy man. And I remembered that we were at my mother-in-law's, who was in the same area as all this took place. I mean, everything I'm talking about happened within like a 2.5, 3 mile radius. Um, at my mother-in-law's one day with the wife and kids, and I don't know, having lunch or something. And my daughter was like 3 or 4 years old, and the other one was like 5. My son was born, but he was a baby at the time. So mother-in-law had lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, and the cul-de-sac backed up against the state forest where all this other stuff happened nearby. It was all within 10-minute walk. And my daughter came in one time while we were sitting there, just whatever. She was playing in the backyard with her sister. And we had no problem because it wasn't a really big backyard, but they could go out and play. And she came in and she was like, I don't remember she said mommy or daddy, but she came in and said that there's a hairy man watching her from the woods. Like, hairy man from the woods. I mean, who's going to be back here? We're at the end of a cul-de-sac. There's nobody around. The neighbors, nobody with a beard or anything like that. So we were like, okay, stop. Just go back outside and, play with your sister. And probably like 20 minutes later, she came in again and she's like, there's a hairy man staring, watching us play. So at that point, we jumped up and we ran outside. And the backyard wasn't that big. I mean, it was probably maybe 30 by 50. And we're looking and, it's pretty much trees and really, really thick bushes, behind the wall of like the perimeter of the property. And we're like, we don't see nothing. We don't see anybody. We don't hear anybody. And we're like, okay. So, me and the wife come back inside and we're like, man, this kid has such an imagination when they're this little. And my mother-in-law's sitting there at the sink washing dishes, and she comes out with, well, don't be so surprised. And she just left it at that. And we never thought of questioning her or anything else at the time. I'm just remembering the incident, as it happened. So I'm like, okay, this is, this kind of stuff is really getting me interested in what's going on around the neighborhood. So now, I find out there's different, websites you can go look for reports and stuff like that. So I'm on one and I found one that there was a report back from 19, I think 52, and it was on the same railroad tracks about 2 miles south of where I had my sighting. And I was like, well, that's cool. That's 1952. I had mine in 1976. I was like, okay, whatever. I mean, somebody said they saw something. I started reading the other ones, and they're pretty. I got a couple sightings that I read. A couple weird sounds, yells, hollers, whoops that other people have said that they've encountered. Haven't met anybody who said they saw footprints or anything substantial like that. But then again, I grew up in the area. I was there since '63. I'm 63 now. In the time there, I belonged to the volunteer fire department. I was a police officer for the town. Um, Went from the town after a few years and went to corrections, retired from there for the state. But the whole time, being with the fire department and with the police department, I mean, we went on calls where it's so rural that somebody's saying, there's got to be somebody outside, or a burglar or a peeping Tom or something. We would go out there, we would find nothing. And I'm like, all those calls that we went on in those areas that we went, aren't that really far away? You could consider it in, 30-minute drive. from where I was patrolling for the town from where I grew up. And, well, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. Um, it was just things like that really got me, more or less, interested into it. There was one time just a few years ago that I went and let the dog out of the back slider of the backyard. So I opened up the slider and I bend down, I hooked the dog up to his chain, and he goes runs out, and then all of a sudden I hear this roar with a yip at the end of it. It was like roar yip, and then it happened again, and then it was totally silent, and I'm like, that was really 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 loud, but it came from across the lake on farm property, and I was like, couldn't, after reading all these, those books and seeing these shows and stuff, people say, they feel it in their chest. It wasn't anything that I could feel in my chest, but it was just so loud. Louder than a coyote that you hear from across the lake, or louder than a moo you would hear from the cows, or something like that. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. Let's note that down. But that's pretty much, how I pretty much got, roped into it. Everything just, you just kind of like go down that rabbit hole a little bit, but you can, certain things would just trigger memories that came back. If I didn't watch the YouTube, I probably would have never thought of it again. I would have never, thought anything of the two vocalizations, I'll call them, from across the lake. I wouldn't have thought twice about it. I would have been like, okay, shut the door, you know, and that would have been it.
Well, yeah, a lot of people do have, kind of those memories start surfacing once, and they didn't think of it as their experience. They didn't think that that experience was actually something related to Bigfoot. But let's go back to that first sighting that you had when you were quite young. And I realize you don't remember exactly what your emotional state was, but why do you think you failed to tell anyone about that?
I think at that time, um, being the age we were, in the area that we were, all the kids um, in the neighborhood had quite a few kids. Um, their parents belonged to the volunteer firehouse, so they had a junior corps. So when you were 12, you were able to join the juniors, and everybody was a junior. It was, everybody lived right there. I was literally across the street from the railroad tracks. It was the big thing when you were a kid. The train would come through, like 3 times a day. Most of the time on the way down, when it was coming from, I guess, from up in Newtown down into Shelton, right, along the lake, right alongside the Housatonic River, and it would throw sparks. And in the summertime, it would always cause a bunch of little brush fires. For a kid being 12, 15, 16 years old, hey, we can go get a ride on the fire truck and go out and put the fires out. And it was pretty cool. Everybody belonged to it. And I was on my when I had the encounter, I was on my way to my buddy's house, and I wasn't about to tell anybody what I just saw because of what they would probably say. It was just something I don't remember being nervous saying I'm not going to tell them or anything like that. I just decided, I'm just going to forget about it and not worry about it. And I asked them, because I'm still good friends with him. We talk really every day. He's retired from the Air Force, and um, we're both retired and stuff, but we talk. He's down in Texas, I'm up here, and I told him, I says, this is what happened. And it was probably about 6 months after I made my report. I was like, this is what happened. I was on my way to your house one day, and he's like, well, why didn't you tell me? I was like, well, why do you think I didn't want to say anything? That I never said anything to over to anybody. He's like, oh, we would have razzed you to no end. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what it was. So, that just didn't go any further than between me and this thing in front of me until, much later in life.
Do you remember the first person you told?
The first person I told was I didn't even say anything to my wife at the time. I made the report and then I got a phone call back from an investigator. So I told him about it. And then it was right after that I told my wife. And she remembers the incidents that we had. She remembers all that kind of stuff. And after I told my buddy, everybody knows now because I started, the Facebook group and they're all on it and everything else. But it just basically just became part of um, conversations. In the beginning, oh, you're nuts, oh, you're nuts. Um, my wife never said anything like that because where she grew up, at her place was next to the state forest there. She told me after, I told her what was going on and everything. She's like, when we were kids, because she had a lot of kids in her neighborhood. And she says, we used to go down to the forest and play. And she says, there was a couple times that she thought that it was either that they felt something was watching them or they thought they heard something in the woods, but she never saw anything, and they would run out and just go home. And she said it kind of like ruined their day at the time. But that was the exception, um, for that. I've gone down. I'm looking. I was at a graduation party a couple weeks ago for my niece, and one of my friends from the Mason Lodge. He was there, and he grew up. He was one of my wife's neighborhood friends. That's how he got invited. He was there, and he comes up. He's like, hey, how's the Facebook group going? I'm like, oh, it's going good. Everything's moving along. He says, I never told you. He says, back in the early '90s, he says he was out on the tracks, and him and a girlfriend, not a girlfriend, but a female friend. They were in their mid 20s. They were riding quads up on the railroad tracks, and he said that the girl was up in front of him. He lost sight of her, and then she came flying back around at him, and she's like, "You're never gonna guess what I saw." She said, "I saw a Bigfoot." And he razzed her a little bit. He's like, "No, you didn't." She said, "It ran right across the railroad tracks in front of me." She says it was big. He said she wouldn't. I couldn't get any size. She just said it was big, and it ran, right across in front of her on the quad. And when he told me where it was like a mile and a half from where I saw mine. And then I put it together with the time that he said that she saw it was the early '90s. It's in the exact same time frame as when my daughter was little, coming in saying that she saw the hairy man. So, I'm thinking it's pretty active around here. It just a couple people, I've talked to going to a deli, and I don't know if I had a shirt on or something that said Bigfoot on it or something. And the guy, working, he's like, "Oh, you into that Bigfoot stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah." I said, "Pretty cool." He says, "We used to have a guy. He was a bus driver. He said he used to come in here, and he says one morning, he says he swore he saw one right in front of the bus. We all laughed at him and everything like that. He was only like 36 years old, driving the bus, but he said he swore up and down that's what it was. But there's quite a bit of activity that I'm starting to pull out from here and there in the area, and so, some of it's only a few years old. Some of it's literally only a year old. But the location of the sightings are literally, a person could walk, there in a couple hours if you had to walk to each point, in this location area. And it's right along the river, right along a stream, um, railroad tracks, and the power lines.
Yeah,
Everything's right there.
they often do follow, it seems like riverways or something that makes it easy for them to walk under those power lines because usually it's clear under them, or often they are.
Yep, but I'm sitting there. I've been looking at all the different areas, um, because I mean I grew up around here. I know the areas, the towns, and things like that. And when you look up one and he gives it, he won't say exactly where. When he's giving a report, he won't say exactly where it was, but he'll tell me it was in this area and it backed up to this property, and he was like, I was 5 minutes from here. You could kind of figure out the exact general location of, exactly where it happened. And then you can put, okay, that'll be point A. And then the next one comes in who says, they heard something that was, 2 miles away, a year later. Um, it's just, I don't, everything. I'd love to do, I don't know, maybe I'll try to do an overlay map and see what I come up with the different locations and things like that.
That'd be interesting, yeah, to kind of see correlate timeframes and sightings and locations, see if there's a pattern or a migration pattern even that they
Yeah,
might have. Going back to your days as a police officer, I find it really interesting that people would sometimes say that there were peeping toms or some prowler or something around. I grew up in the country in a very rural area. There weren't a lot of people around, period. So, for something to be out there, but it's funny, no one ever really described what they were seeing or what made them think that there was something out there.
no, it was basically like noise complaints. Um, I heard somebody at my door, opened it up, there was nobody there. Um, the animals were going crazy. Um, can you come and check out the property? I'm home alone. I heard something hit the house. Can you go in the backyard and check it out? And at that time, I wasn't even, Bigfoot never even crossed our mind. It was, we were looking for somebody, like a human that's, nosy, peeping Tom or something like that. We go in, we walk the property, make sure the house is locked, tell them, whatever it was is gone. We looked around, we can't find anything. And, that was it. If now I would say I would look for, like, hand marks on the wall. I'd look for footprints, and things like that. Never that kind of stuff never occurred to me then.
Yeah, you didn't have any frame of reference at that time that it might be a Bigfoot. And of course, Bigfoot patterns, now we know more about that. I think today it's easier for people to admit or to be knowledgeable about Bigfoot habits and things to look for, but also it's easier now to tell a Bigfoot story than it was, say, back in the 50s, 60s, even the 70s, because it's a more popular subject. More people are
Mhm.
coming forward saying they've seen something, whether it be a Bigfoot crossing the road in front of them, or whether they be out hunting, fishing, see something, or like in your case, a kid just playing and suddenly there's a Bigfoot in the area.
Exactly. It's pretty wild. I mean, like, I've only been really, like, researching it now for probably about 5 years. Which started out, just curiosity on YouTube, and then, talking to this person or on YouTube or on Facebook, or, joining that Facebook page and listening to that podcast, and, then doing my own research, off the internet of the area. Um, you know, it drove me to the point where in January, I started my own private group on Facebook, Connecticut Bigfoot Research. Um, we got, I don't know, like, 330 members on it now. There's people I've talked to through my law enforcement career, actually, game wardens in the state. I had one, that I've known, man, his whole career. He's a few years younger than me, but he's up for retirement. And I called him up a couple months ago, and I was like, hey, how much longer you got? He's like, I only got like about a year. I was like, oh, that's good, good. I says, I want to ask you a question. And he was like, what? And I kind of did it roundabout. I just didn't want to come out with it. So I asked him, I says, you've been all over the state. I says, you guys get a lot of reports of, different things happening, like, more than like the police department would get, more of on an animal type thing. I was like, you ever get any reports of, people finding, big footprints, or, they hear howling or anything that you can't explain or everything? And he came right out with, he says, you mean Bigfoot? And I was like, yeah. I was like, you ever have any of those or hear of any of those kind of reports? And he couldn't get the word no out quick enough. And I was like, oh, okay. Anybody else would have been like, well, we really haven't dealt with anything like that. I mean, he came out to shut me down so quick. And I was like, hey, it's me. I've known you for 25 years. I was like, we work together. What, how come? He's like, nope, nope. He says, we don't get anything like that in the state. There's nothing here. It's kind of like the mountain lion myth that people keep saying they see the mountain lions here showing this, that, and the other. Oh, it's probably just one passing through. Connecticut doesn't have a mountain lion issue.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. I mean, people just are really in denial in part because maybe it's a little scary to admit that there's something out there maybe that we don't know about, or it's just that just shut down any kind of openness to people's experience like yours when you were young. But so many
Mm-hmm.
people have seen this thing.
Right. Right. And is somebody making up these footprints, where you know a guy who's 250 pounds, 6'2", walks on it, and there makes no indentation, and then in 5 feet from there on the same ground, you have an inch and a half imprint of this giant 18-foot or 18-inch footprint. I mean, you can't just make these things like that, and it just doesn't add up. So there's got to be something, out there. It's like everybody's like, oh, well, I don't know, I don't know. I'm like, I know. I was like, you can take my word for it. I mean, you know me all my life. Um, I'm a Mason. I was in law enforcement. Um, I had the power to take people's freedom away from them on my word. And I all of a sudden now I turn around and say, I saw this when I was 15. Oh, you're full of crap. No, oh, no, I saw it when I was 15. You can believe me. I told you that. I saw it. And, I figure they want to discount it because of their ignorance. They don't know, how else to deal with the subject.
Exactly. When you were out there, close to where those nests were, maybe, or even other locations, did you ever see any like wood structures or anything?
I I don't remember. I remember. I mean, I remember this one small wood structure, kind of looked like a fort built into the side of a bicycle path we used to take when we were kids, and the rumor of that was some of the older kids' siblings built this kind of like fort to hang out in. I was like, oh, but that's really like the only thing I can even come close to anything that I remember seeing.
The sounds that you heard, can you describe those? What were those like?
Oh, the vocalizations that I heard.
Yes.
Like I said, it was across the Housatonic River. It was on Lake Zor. It was right up by the farm, up by the Chippewa Dam. Um, Across, they had the farm, and then they had a lot of wooded area that's still considered the farm. It's their property, and it was like a it was I mean it was quiet out. It was only like 7 o'clock at night, 7:30, something like that. And I was there. I all of a sudden I just heard this roar, yip, roar, yip, and that was it. And I was like, whoa, that was really weird. And then I'm sitting there trying to think, what would that yip be? It was either a yip or a whoop at the end, but it had that whoop, that yip whoop type of sounding to it. And I was like, I looked directly across the lake at the time, and I'm like, I heard it from right over there, and it was nothing but woods. There's no houses there. There's no nothing. It was just woods, and it projected across the lake extremely loud. Not just like when we were kids, we used to yell because I grew up on the lake there, literally on the lake, and we had the mountains on the other side that was undeveloped at the time. We used to sit out on the porch and go, hey, and then you could hear, hey, hey, the echoes back and forth coming up. And this was no anything like that, where your voice gets diminished in the echo. I mean, this was powerful, came right across. Couldn't feel anything, like people say they feel that vibration from, a roar or a vocalization. It's like there was none of that. It was just extremely loud from there, and it was. I don't want to say it was machine way. It was more of a living sound that came from something living.
Was it close enough for you to be able to hear any like movement noise or see anything?
No, no, it was literally across the lake. I don't know, maybe I'm guessing 400 or 500 yards because I lived about 100 yards off the front of the lake. Then the lake has 200 yards, and then it was up into the woods on the other side of the lake.
Have you heard the Sierra sounds?
Yeah,
What do you think of those?
so I mean, I've never heard anything like that, myself. Besides, what you hear on, YouTube or stuff like that. I've never heard any like. I don't remember ever hearing any kind of like growling or anything like that. When we were kids, we were in the woods from morning to night. It was like get up, eat breakfast. I got to go meet my friends. Got on our bikes and we were gone. For lunch and stuff like that. Whoever's house we were nearest, we'd just stop in. That parent would make us some, peanut butter and jelly, a glass of milk, and we'd be gone until it was, time to go home. You know, at supper time. And the weird thing that I can say back then, I mean, we're having a real, I'm not going to say issue, but the amount of black bears that we're seeing around here now it's crazy. I mean, there's somebody on some Facebook page for the area or the town always putting up a couple a day. He was in my yard. He was by my kitchen. He was on the porch. He's walking through the center of town. Things like that. I never even being a policeman driving all over Newtown and everything. I never once saw a black bear. I think about 4 years ago. Since about 4 years ago, I think I've seen six, and that's just me. So that I can't say that way back then it was a bear or anything. We never saw. They say they were there, but we never ever ran into one. Never saw like a track or nothing. We used to find deer tracks and raccoon tracks and things like that. But it's only been the last few years that they're really making a name for themselves around here.
Now, the one that you saw, you said was more tall and thin. I've heard of a few people that have seen one that they would describe it that way. And what do you think causes the differences in shapes? Because most of them are bulky, they're tall and more bulky.
Yeah, this one was like like I said, it was like a big basketball player. The only thing I found in a book that was really close to it, but the head was smaller, is this picture, and the head was a little smaller, but it was just all black, like a shadow black. Like if you're looking at a shadow.
Yeah.
But but
Mhm.
it was that was the only one I made. Out of everything I've seen, gone through in different books and everything, I was like, that's pretty much the closest to what it it looked like to me.
When it walked away, could you see the gait? Could you see how it moved or anything?
Oh yeah, it moved like they say it didn't stand up totally straight. It kind of like leaned forward a little bit, and the arms went. It wasn't one of those real long thing. It like balanced itself with its arms, but it took you know long gapes, and into the woods it went.
I'm sure you've seen the Patterson Gimlin film. How did that compare with the way Patty moving along in that film?
Um, if it was, I don't know, the way I look at that film, I would say the one that I saw was taller and more lean, but pretty much walked like that. It looked like it had longer legs than the Patty film,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
more streamlined. Kind of like you got your football player, you got your basketball player. This was much more of a not a football player design. This was more tall, lean, basketball type.
the Patty film, it kind of seemed like there was a sort of a hurried kind of a movement there, like trying to move out of the area. Did this one seem like it was trying to get away from you, or did it seem just calm?
Like I said, I looked up and it was just standing right there opposite me, 75, 100 feet away. I looked up at it. I mean, the railroad tracks were flat, so I looked kind of up at it, and it just turned to its right and then just walked kind of like Patty did, just one, two, three, four, five, gone into the woods.
Yeah. So since you've been researching this the last few years, has anything surprised you that you've heard or talked to people about?
Surprised me in what way do you mean?
Well, in any way, in any manner that you didn't have that knowledge of Bigfoot or that just that their experience was such.
It's basically it's kind of like locations that they are. Um, I'm really amazed at the locations that these sightings here in Connecticut on the area that I research are coming in. They may be years apart or not, but the locations are all within, like, from where I live. I could get to any one of these locations in 20-25 minutes, to drive. And it's not like there's only like three or four of them. There's quite a few that you talk to this one, talk to that one. All of a sudden they say something. Oh, what about that? I'm like, well, that's another one. That's right here. It might have happened 8 years ago, but that's right here in this area. And I'm just getting there's so much different information out there, um, that you get a trickle here and a trickle there, and you can kind of put one and one together to get two. You might have to wait a little bit longer, but then all of a sudden there's that piece that fits into that.
That gives a lot of credibility to to something being in the area for sure, because if there are multiple sightings in that close proximity altogether.
Oh yeah, I was amazed. I figured, once I started looking, somebody like, you might hear about, two or three sightings, in Connecticut. Like I go from like Hartford County over to Litchfield County in the New York line. I really don't go to the eastern side of the state. Um, I do my things, Fairfield County, some New Haven County, Litchfield County. And just in those areas alone, the reports that have come in over the years, I'm going back, I'm only going back to 1952. That's as far as I can find anything so far. Not that other people have seen, but stuff that I've, personally looked up and found. I'm amazed at it. I'm like, from the different reports, there's quite a few Class A reports of sightings, of it. There's a lot of, you know, Class B where when one of the Class Bs was from over in Stepney, part of Monroe, which is, I was in Monroe, but on the other side towards the lake. This guy said he heard this whooping, screaming at, I don't know, it was a little after midnight one night, and it was clear. And he said the direction, he gave his coordinates where he was. And then he said it was, a little northeast from where he was. He figured about 2 miles away. He said that he was able to hear this roaring, screaming. And when I put it into Google from where he was giving his report to where he said he was approximately hearing it from, it was like right there on the railroad tracks. Same railroad tracks.
Were these people's description of the Bigfoot that they saw anywhere near the same as what you saw?
It was close. Um, the one from the girl just said it was big and hairy and fast and ran across in front of her. The other one, I got no description from the kids besides it was a hairy man. Looking at him, and then the one from down the railroad tracks in, I think it was Shelton. There was, I guess, 4 or 5 kids going out picking blueberries and raspberries, and they were walking on the railroad tracks. The one came down the hill and was walking in front of them, and they just described it as about a 6.5 foot, um, kind of ugly thing that had long hair, walking on 2 feet. And then when it finally noted, yeah, and they said in the report that they followed it for a couple minutes, and then it realized that they were there and went back up into the woods.
Yeah, difficult to get, too many specifics there. What do you think about them getting closer and closer into areas that, public areas like dumpster diving and such?
I mean, with the way that over the last few years the building has gone. I mean, subdivisions are just popping up. I mean, like I said, when I said I was a cop and I grew up in Newtown, um, there was nothing but farmland up there. Everybody knew everybody. Um, we used to hunt on everybody's property and things like that. And now, everybody who I say the old timers, I mean, I'm 63 now, but I would consider, them in their 85, 90s if they're still around. You know, the kids don't want really nothing to do with it. So if they leave the land and the farms to the kids, they basically sell it for subdivisions, and they put 20, 30 houses here and there. And I think it really encroached on a lot of the farmland that's up around here. So what are they going to do if they do choose to stay around? Are they taking their chances to be seen? Do they not care if you see them? um I don't know.
Exactly. What do you think they are?
Oh, I mean, from what I saw and from what I heard, um this is a living, breathing, hairy, it's got to be mammal of some sort, I don't know if it's leftover caveman stuff or if it's an ape or things like that. I was like, but it's solid. It's the way I look at it, it's something that can be shot,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
taken down.
flesh and blood kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How human did it look? I mean, a lot of people describe them, and I know you didn't see the facial expression or anything like that, but just from your impression of it, how human did it look? A lot of them think that it has a lot of human qualities.
Yeah, a lot. What else walks on two legs? Has a body center mass and arms and a head like that. In the same areas as we do. It's not a dog. It's not a bear. Um, it's not a moose or deer. I mean, this thing literally walks like we do. So, I mean, the characteristics doesn't it walks similar to us, not exactly like us, but then again, its body definitions aren't the same as ours either. Arms are longer, legs are longer. It's much more beefy. Strength wise. I mean, you can see that this thing is, you know, it's it's very well suited for its environment.
Exactly. Yeah. And obviously has survived that environment for a very long time, possibly.
And it has to have some kind of intelligence, not to be seen all the time. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of times that like anything, if you're going to try to hide from somebody, eventually somebody's going to see you. You can't be 100%, but then there's other times where somebody's seeing it walk across a field. One of the guys up here, um, which I have to go to the farm. I really hope he hears this because I've been trying to get his name. I know the exact area where he saw his family owned a farm. He was out in the backyard hitting golf balls, and he saw the deer running across the back, frantically. And he said the grass was like 3 feet high. He says, and this thing's hips were above the grass, chasing the deer. And they said they watched it for like 3 minutes. And through other reports, and other reporters, they don't want to give out information of who the guy was. But when the guy gave the description of where he was, I knew exactly the farm they were talking about. So I'm planning on giving him a go knock on the door. Hey, is this you? Type of greeting.
You get a little more information there. What do you think about the Native American stories and their interaction with, the hairy man or Sasquatch or whatever? So many different names for the mountain man, the wild man.
I, you know, all their stuff is handed down by word of mouth and stories and things like that. If you go back before we decided to come over here and screw everything up, um, it could be it's very very possible that there was a coexistence because they were very Native American are very in touch with with their surroundings and nature and the way their beliefs that everything is interconnected and every just just in their belief system. And if this is something that was here and they did in fact, um some of them think of them as watchers over their people. Some of them think of them as traders. They trade goods back and forth, things like that. Um, just like when the American Indians started losing their land and everything, where we started encroaching on that. Um, you don't know if the Bigfoot were intelligent enough to say, "Hey, we're out of here and we don't want to be seen anymore." Where, the American Indians, there was maybe a much bigger population. So, the bloodlines can go on and on. And we see that where the Bigfoot Sasquatch don't want you to see that. So, deeper into the woods they go, I'm going to avoid I'm going to avoid people because I know what they're like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are just so many native stories out there about something anyway that we don't run into every day. You've
Mhm.
spent a lot of time in nature and especially with your law enforcement background. What do you think about the orbs that people often see out in the wooded areas or in often the same areas that Bigfoot is there? They may be related or not. Have you ever seen anything like that?
I'm one of these, unless I see it, I'm not going to probably believe it. If I didn't have my experience, I could be interested in the subject, but I don't know if I would believe it. I believe in Bigfoot. I've seen it, seen it, heard it. It was there. Orbs, I don't know. I don't know even where I stand. I have to be a little bit more. I mean, there's all kinds of, some people see them, every time they go out, but they can't explain where they come from. Um, is it dust over a dirty leads? I don't know. I mean, I've seen orbs on family pictures of when the kids were little. Same area where I saw my Bigfoot. Um, where the kids were ice skating on the pond, they were all sitting together, and there was like six kids together taking the picture of them, but there's nothing but like orbs. It's not snow; it's orbs around them in the picture. So you know, I don't know. What was it snowing? Was it a dirty lens? Is it an orb? I don't know. I tend not to go with the supernatural type of stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of the cameras, especially the digital cameras, will pick up on light, reflection and things like that too. So
Mhm.
can also cause some things like that.
It,
Well,
it it seems like more right now. It seems more of the paranormal stuff is being photographed and recorded on much more advanced technology. So the more you're going to be able to pick more out with something today than you would have 10 years ago. And it seems like with the way technology advances, you're getting more and more sightings of this kind of thing.
that's
So I
true.
don't,
There is a lot more of physical evidence of, I guess, audio as well as visual.
yeah, I mean, like, even with, like Dog Man kind of stuff, you know, I don't, I don't know if I believe in Dog Man. I believe somebody said that they saw one or believed that they saw one and it caught on to somebody else, and caught on to somebody else. And now all of a sudden, we're hearing of hundreds of, sightings of Dog Man all of a sudden. And it's only been recently, did it just catch on and sound cool because it ran with the Bigfoot theme? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to say. That's for sure. But we
I'm
just
not, I'm
one
not telling
case at a
people that
time.
they're
And
lying. Yeah, I'm not telling people that they didn't see it. I mean, they might have, I don't know. But, like I said, until I actually see one, and I can say, "Oh, that's a dog man," because I'm aware of what a dog man is. Until then, believe what you want.
exactly. Well, Carl, I really do appreciate you being on the show today. And I want to remind the audience to please subscribe so we can keep this channel going. And I appreciate everyone watching the show. And Carl, I especially appreciate you telling your story to us today.
Okay, and so everybody knows, on my Facebook page, which is Connecticut Bigfoot Research, I do have the podcasts I keep under the featured section. So if anybody wants to hear the different ones, they're there.
Very good. We'll be looking for it. Thank you so
Sounds good.
much.
Thank you, Linda. Have a good day.
You too.